then we address Montesquieu. Montesquieu, what does he say, Montesquieu? Ivana, you studied Montesquieu, right? What does he say, Montesquieu? So, what should we do in order to avoid despotism?
We have to separate powers based on different branches.
In the next classes, we're gonna talk about this guy, Montesquieu, founding father of constitutionalism. Constitutionalism. He said, it is not very important which kind of government you have, but the important thing, in order not to be under a despotism, is that you divide the powers of the state. Powers of the state are, as Ivana said, Ivana, you know, the others. What are the powers of the state? Okay, you don't know, so you should change course. Instead of studying political science, you can study chemistry, biology, medicine. If you don't know what is the power of the states, what are the powers of the state, what are we going to discuss here? This is, you should know it in general. What are the powers of the state? No. What are the powers of the states? How many? The powers is divided into different. The state power is divided into different powers. These powers are of three types. Legislative. Why? Because legislative makes the laws. It makes the laws. Executive, it executes the laws. And judiciary, it judges based on the laws. Okay? So, is the most important. Indeed, yesterday we saw Rousseau. Rousseau, he says the legislative power must be the expression of popular sovereignty. Expression of popular sovereignty. We consider democratic regimes only the ones where the legislative power is elected by the people, sovereignty. So, the biggest country in the world, we don't consider it as a democracy, which is China. Because in China, you don't have universal suffrage to elect parliament, but is led by the Communist Party who elects and nominates the Congress. So we don't consider it as a democracy. North Korea, Vietnam, the Arab monarchs, Emirates, and so on, do not consider. We consider a system as democratic only when the legislative power is elected by the Montesquieu, who was a liberal thinker that we're going to address then. He said, but to be a good regime, meaning not a despotism, must also consider another thing, that the three powers of the states must be divided. There must be a separation of power. There must be a separation of power, and in the sense that those who exercise the legislative power must be different people and cannot control those who exercise the executive power, and especially the judicial power must be divided. So it's not enough. You say, like for example, so China, not a democratic country. Why? Because the people does not elect the legislative power. Okay? Russia, democratic country, but the parliament, the Russian parliament, Duma, is elected by the people formally. Okay? But if you go at the election, your name is Alexei Navalny, you're the leader of the opposition, you got a good result to the election, the judiciary power is going to take you, bring you to Siberia and kill you in jail. So it's not independent, so we cannot say it's a proper democracy and it's different from despotism. So we need the separation of powers. We need the separation of power. This is what we call, according to Montesquieu, constitution. Constitutionalism is that you need a constitution that divides the different powers and divides the different power and makes this separation, and all the different powers must respect a higher power, which is the power of the law, which we call the rule of law, crucial principle of liberalism. But this is just to tell you that this problem is not yet fixed, and that we have to stop classes at 10:30 because I want to go to this debate on the department promoted over the referendum that we're going to have next Sunday here in Italy, which is about separation of power, because it's they want to make the judiciary system work better, because here in Italy it doesn't work very well. So they want to make it more efficient, they want to make it more just, and so on. So they promoted this reform, but then the others say, but this reform is going to make one part of the judiciary power more dependent on the executive power. Okay, so some of them say this is going to make things more efficient, and other people say this is going to infringe the principle of the division of power, because through this referendum the executive is going to get more control over the judiciary. Okay, so this is just to say. But we have previous things to say before getting to Montesquieu, because we want to recall the two last thinkers that we addressed. Locke and Rousseau. So this is the course of history of political thought. So what is very important that you get is the political concepts, the political ideas. So what I want you to understand is what democracy means and what liberalism means. And we do it by studying the ideas of their founding fathers, which are Locke and Rousseau. Not because we want to, we have some kind of fetishism on these old people. No, because they established some principles that were crucial to understand the ideas, right? So this next year you're going to do the course of political science, in which you study concepts as they are, as concepts, as things that are there and exist always. The history of political thought, we want to understand this concept in their historical process, how they emerged, why they emerged, because they will not remain forever. Every political concept was born, was at the center, and then was dead. Like the concept of the idea of empire. We don't have it anymore, empires, but for many centuries it was the most important political force. So to understand democracy, we think democracy is the general value that we have. Democracy is a thing that existed in ancient Greece, then over all the Middle Ages did not exist anymore, and then right now it's very important concept. But we as Western, we consider it a value that we have to make it global. And some people say, yeah, you consider it as a value, but actually it's just, a way to make decisions that, it's based on the majority rule. So we want to understand the concept of liberalism and the concept of democracy. I want you to understand that, when you hear a political discourse, you should be able to understand this comes from the point of view of liberalism, this comes from the point of view of democracy, and so on and so forth. So we start with these two thinkers in order to understand the point. So to understand the concept that they contributed to create. So John Locke, founding father of liberalism. Why is the founding father of liberalism? Because he enters into a dialogue with Thomas Hobbes by saying, yeah, I agree that we need to think of political authority as a social contract. So he agrees, he's a contractarianist, he goes with Hobbes to say, yeah, let's imagine that the origin of political power is from below, it's from a social contract of the citizens that gives power to the political authority, so this is good, but this is the founding father of liberalism because it focuses on the limits of this power, Liberalism is about limiting power. It's about limiting the government. Why? Because liberalism is about liberty. And liberalism has a concept of liberty, a concept of freedom, as a negative freedom, which means you're free to do whatever you want when you don't have laws that forbid you to do that thing. You're free to do whatever you want when there is an absence of laws. So the smaller is the government, the smaller are the laws, the bigger is your freedom. So liberalism is about limiting the government in order to expand freedom. So we see that in the United States of America, which is a country very much founded on Locke's ideas, on the ideas of liberalism. Indeed, when we're gonna see the French Revolution, we see that at the beginning, the Declaration of Independence of 4 July 1776, it's the beginning is we think that human beings are born equal and with unalienable rights, which are the rights to life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness, which basically uses the Locke's ideas, which were all men have natural rights, starting from the natural rights to life, freedom, and property. So, the United States of America, which is a country very much founded on the principle of liberalism, is a country in which they care very much about the fact that the individual, the citizens, must be free from the influence of the state. So, the state should be limited. This is why they understand that not having a system of public health is an issue and is causing major problems. But at the same time, they say, but we're not going to compromise in making the state bigger and bigger and bigger, because to establish a system of public health, you need to establish a bureaucracy. And when you establish a bureaucracy, you know that you're expanding the state and so on and so forth, and this limits your freedom, because when you get, when you get into the states, sometimes your freedom is limited. Like, for example, when you have to go to Questura to make the permesso di soggiorno. Who has been in Questura to make the permesso di soggiorno? Yeah, everyone, I think. It looks like they kidnap you because they don't care about your time. You can wait for centuries. If in Italy you're so unlucky that you get an argument with a policeman, then the policeman sue you, so you get into the hand of the judiciary system, and basically the judiciary system is going to kidnap you for 6 years, because you never know when there is going to be a trial, you never know when there is going to be something. So, the state is kind of limiting your freedom. The biggest is the state, and the less freedom you have according to liberalism. And more freedom means less rules, means less constraint. So liberalism is about making limited government, making the government smaller. That's all. Our friend John Locke, he says, to make the state smaller, you have to limit the government, you have to limit the power of the sovereign. The sovereignty, as it was imagined by Thomas Hobbes, you have to put some limitations. Limited government. What are the limitations of the government? Natural rights. According to Locke, natural rights. Every man is born with natural rights that are, that everybody understands through reason. Everybody understands through reason that each human being has rights to life, freedom, and property. So, this was the origin. But the point is, liberalism is based on individual rights as a limitation of the power of the government. The government cannot do whatever they want. They cannot interfere with your individual rights. The goal of the government is to protect your individual rights. If the government violates your individual rights, you have a collective right, which is the right to resist unjust government. You have the right to revolt, you have the right to resist, and this is, even nowadays, is written in the American Constitution. You have the right to resist an unjust government when the government takes upon your rights, infringe your rights, violate your rights. We will see in the American Constitution, it's still a right. So this is a collective right in which, the social contract between the people and the government is based on the idea that the government protects your individual rights. The coercion of the government through the police, through the bureaucracy and so on is aimed at protecting your rights. That's all. So because liberalism thinks that, the full expression of life, the full expression of the individuals is happening in your private life. The pursuit of happiness means, family, you start a business, you try to get success, you try to get rich, and so on and so forth. But it's not within the state. Politics is just instrumental. The very important thing is that you have your rights to be protected. This is why liberalism is very much focused on legal rights, civil rights. Civil rights is everybody is equal in front of the law and has the right to be, to have a first trial and so on and so forth. So this is why liberalism is so obsessed in building up very good constitutional systems in which you are protected. International Court of Justice, European Court of Justice, local Court of Justice, constitutional courts, in which these courts are able to control that nobody violates the rights, the legal rights. Liberalism. This is liberalism, so it's very much focused on this idea. This is the rule of law, that the law is sovereign, that the sovereign is the law, that the sovereign is the constitution. No political power, no government can infringe the constitution, can violate the constitution. There is the principle of the rule of law, the principle of individual rights, the principle of limited government. This is liberalism. Liberalism was developed by John Locke, who was a contractarianist, who imagined this situation in the state of nature, in which you have a state of nature in which the situation is not that bad. It's not that bad because people are acting according to their individual rights, so the situation is not that bad. But when you have a conflict in the state of nature between the individuals, you don't know how to make decisions about this conflict. You don't know who can regulate this conflict, who can say you're right, you're wrong. So you need to establish the state from the state of nature. You need to establish the government in order to make, to regulate conflicts, to make legal decisions, to regulate controversies, to rule litigation. So already in the ideas of Locke, the very important thing is the judicial system, is the law, is the normative system. So liberalism is about that makes the rule of law, that limits the powers of the states, that limits government. John Locke says, we have to build up the government because in the state of nature there is no way to decide for a conflict between two different people. We have to build up this government in order to make this decision and to protect our right. But if government violates our right, we have the right to resist. We have the right to revolt. Okay, so it also says the natural right to property. This is important because it justifies by saying that when you work on nature, when you transform a thing, you put your labor on natural things, you have the right to enjoy the fruits of your labor. And the right to enjoy the fruits of your labor means you get some form of property over the fruits of your labor. This makes property a natural rights because at the time, the political power of the crown or the aristocracy of the king, they had the right to think your things because everybody was in the soil, in the territory of the queen was belonging of the queen, so they took your things. But look, he said, no, I want, this is a natural right. So this is why then liberalism will become very much entrenched to capital, to the beginning of capitalism, because already recognizes this right to property will become very central for the industrial revolution and for the development of capitalism. Liberalism is focused on the individual, means on the rights of the individual. The first principle of liberalism is individual rights. And we will see more in detail which kind of rights we have. But we can say, in general, there is a major distinction between human rights and citizen rights. Human rights are the rights that belongs to you because you're a human being, and nobody can violate. Citizen rights is the rights that belongs to you because you're a citizen. Like being a citizen of Italy gives you the right to vote at the election of Italy. Nobody's gonna say no, but you should give. You're not a citizen, you're not gonna complain. Human rights is the right that the state cannot, the state, you have the right of living in the God you want, you have the right of speech, of saying what you think, you you have freedom of thinking, you have some human rights, you have the rights not to be taken by the state and put in jail without a fair trial. So this we consider that these rights should be respected everywhere. So liberalism is about protecting individual rights, the rights of the individual. So there is a primacy of the individuals. Politics is just an instrument. It's not a goal. It's a tool to protect the rights of the individuals. And we have to limit the government to the protection of the rights of the individual, of the property, and so on and so forth. So all this is based on this idea of negative freedom. Negative freedom means freedom from the state. Negative freedom is freedom from the state. That's you're free to do whatever you want when you have no laws limiting. Positive freedom, the freedom within the state. Freedom within the state means that freedom is when you participate to create the laws that you have to obey to. Because if there is a law that you have to obey, but you think this law is very good, you participate, you believe in this law, this is not a limitation. You feel that you have contributed, so you feel free even when you obey to this law. Negative freedom, positive freedom. This is negative freedom, positive freedom. This is a very important distinction. So liberalism is based on a negative conception of freedom, which means you can do whatever you want when there is not a law that forbids you. Then we will study another liberal thinker, John Stuart Mill, which will try to expand this liberal conception of freedom by saying, negative freedom, we have to think it in terms. You're free to do whatever you want until you don't break the law and until you don't harm others. You don't harm others. So then, not harm principle. So you're free to do whatever you want until you don't harm others. This will be the development of the negative freedom. Positive freedom, it's a bit more difficult concept, but you have to understand it. So negative freedom is freedom from the state, from the law. Positive freedom is freedom within the state, within the laws, which means that the state is not just a means, it's a goal to reach your freedom, Because if you believe in the law, if you have participated to create the laws, you feel free even when you obey to these laws, because you believe in the laws, so you don't feel that you're not free to obey to them, because you have created. And this is the principle of democracy. Democracy is the idea that everybody must participate into the state in order to feel free, in order to promote freedom. Freedom is participation. It's not stay outside of the government, of the law, and making the government smaller. No, it's participation. You're free when you take active part in deciding the rules that you have to obey. Positive freedom. Founding father Jean-Jacques Rousseau. So for Jean-Jacques Rousseau, to understand this point of view, we have to introduce another dichotomy between two concepts, another opposition, another juxtaposition between one positive concept and one negative concept. This is so far we have addressed negative freedom and positive freedom. What else we have seen negative and positive? Negative and positive anthropology. Negative anthropology and positive anthropology. What is negative anthropology? Human are bad. So, negative anthropology means human are bad. Human are selfish. Human are greedy. So, they should act on themselves to regulate this nature, to govern this nature, to rule this nature. Human beings are responsible for their actions, because they tend to be bad and they have to limit themselves. They have to be bad and they have to limit themselves. This is a kind of right-wing point of view, because you say, so the only thing of the state is to act against the fact that human beings can behave very bad because they cannot control themselves, they're responsible for their actions. So we need a strong state who is able to put them in jail or to control them or to retribute them when they do bad things, because this is in their nature. Negative freedom, and this is Hobbes. This is Hobbes, if you leave human beings in the state of nature with no state, it's going to be the war of all against all. It's going to be homo homini lupus. It's going to be just the law of the stronger. Who stronger is going to rule. So we need a sovereign. This is Hobbes. We need a sovereign. Otherwise, they're going to say, stronger, I'm going to beat you. Like, the President of the United States seems to have understand very well the thing, because that you have different sovereign state over the world, because he goes to television and say, I have the biggest army, so you shut the fuck up, otherwise I'm going to kill you all. It's very clear that he understands Hobbes very well, the state of nature. He acts like the state of nature. So, positive anthropology. Positive anthropology, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, you see, he has a very good face, like a good guy. It's the opposite of Donald Trump. He looks like very, very kind, very educated guy. Positive anthropology. Positive anthropology, what does he say? He says human beings are good. Like, look at his face, he was good for sure. Human beings are good. Look, how cute, how cute. Human beings are good. What you say in Italy, they call this point of view buonismo, vero Kimberly? Yeah, buonismo means, that they have good feelings, then that they want to rule through good feelings. So, positive anthropology. He says, so it's very, 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 very good to understand the theories of the social contract, because this guy wrote 2 books. One is the Discourse on the Origin of Inequality, which is about the state of nature. One is the social contract. So we make sense understand the term contractarian as state of nature and social contract as good steps. So in this discourse, in which he imagines the state of nature, he develops a theory of positive anthropology. He says, human beings are naturally good. If you leave them in the state of nature, they live peacefully, they mind their own business, they develop their own activities, but they have compassion. They have compassion means that they feel, some kind of empathy with the other human beings because they belong to the same species. So you can understand this. There is a kind of brotherhood between human beings. Because when Palestinian kids die in Palestine, I feel bad. Not because I know these kids, but because I feel brotherhood. They're humans as I am, and I feel sad when the other humans die, especially if they're kids. So there is a kind of brotherhood between human beings that makes us compassionate, that makes us be sad if, other people are dying, as I said yesterday. If there is a car crash in front of here and somebody is gonna die, naturally I feel sad about a human being that dies. So he says they have compassion. They have compassion. So in general, the state of nature would be a good situation. But what makes human beings get out from the state of nature is what makes human beings get out is the idea of perfectibility. Perfectibility means that you can do better. So, according to Rousseau, humans differ from other animals in having the capacity to change. So, perfectibility is the idea that you can get better. You have an idea of perfection and you can tend towards this idea of perfection. So, this is why they start to cooperate with each other. They start to cooperate with each other. They establish the first village and so on and so forth. Through this act of getting out of the state of nature and start cooperating together, it arises the main principle, the main problem that Rousseau wants to address, the main problems that democracy wants to address. What is this problem? Inequality. Inequality. We start to have inequality. Inequality. We establish the village and so on. Then a guy who arrives, he was cultivating aubergine on the field and blah blah blah. There was aubergine growing up, and this guy put a fence over the field. And they say, this field is mine. He introduces the property. And Rousseau said, this guy fucked up everything because he introduced this principle that is the principle of inequality. So you have this property, then we say, okay, this is yours, then we're gonna make it, and so on, and then one day you're gonna hire a guy who works for you in your field, and you pay this guy, so you have the principle of division of labor. After property, you introduce the principle of division of labor, which is the origin of inequality. So, through property and through division of labor, you start to have this distinction between the rich and the poor. The government was born in order to protect the rich, in order to protect the system of inequality, in order to protect this system of injustice, in order to protect the wealth of the rich. So the police is aimed to protect the property of the rich. He doesn't like it. Treat tyranny. So he has, he has an opposite idea from the other. So he said the state of nature was good, the problem is the government, the problem is society. So we see the consequences of positive anthropology. The consequences of positive anthropology is humans are good, naturally good, but they are corrupted by society because of the conditions of society, which is a lot of inequality. So if there is a lot of inequality, those who are at the bottom of society, the lower classes, tend to act bad, not because they're responsible of their action and they're bad people, but because they're corrupted by the situation, or a situation in which they do not have opportunity. If you don't have opportunity, you're gonna sell drugs in the street. You're gonna do crime, you're gonna do prostitution, you're gonna do all these things, not because you're bad naturally, but because you were in this condition. If you take the rich does not commit felonies, not because it's good, but because he doesn't need it, because he's not in this, because society did not put him in the condition of need. So corruption does not come from human nature, but comes from the condition of society. Positive anthropology. This is the principles of left, which is so. The solution is not to have more police to prevent crime and to put criminals in jail. Is not to have more jail. Is not to have a stronger state, but is to have to make the conditions more equal for everybody, which means you have to give the poor the instrument not to do crime, which is first of all education, which is right to work, which is good wage, good salary, and so on and so forth. So you have this system in which you have to promote the equality, and obviously to promote the equality you need the state. You need the state to be active. So this is why democracy wants the state to grow, in order to promote equality, because you need the state to promote equality, because you have the market in which there is private property, civil society in which you have private property, which produces inequality. And you need a state to, intervene on the private sphere, on the market, on society, in order to promote equality. This is why we understand that liberalism is about making the state smaller, and democracy is often about making the state big. Okay? These are just general principles. Then reality is always finding a middle way. So, in general, we can say negative anthropology, positive anthropology. Then probably you have, sometimes you have some people who are rich in good conditions, but they're very bad still. So that's society. but then sometimes you have also, it's easier to be good if you're in a good condition. So the reality is in the middle, but we have to understand reality through these, what we call ideal types, which are extreme and which we build as categories, and so we are able to read reality through these different categories. So, bad anthropology, human beings tend to be bad, they have to regulate themselves. If they don't do it, they're responsible. They're entirely responsible for their own behavior. United States of America, it's a condition in which you can easily get billionaire, but then in 3 days you can get bankrupt and be in the middle of the street and die of hunger because it's your own destiny. You're the only sovereign of your destiny. It's a situation in which it's the richest country in the world, but I don't know if you have been in the United States, but if you go to the richest cities in the world, San Francisco, Los Angeles, you see homeless everywhere. You see homeless people everywhere. You see an epidemic of fentanyl, people dying on the street, because they believe that the principle is you are entirely responsible for your life. You have to pay all the consequences of your life because you're responsible for yourself. And we don't want the state to get bigger and to do this and this. So this is the situation. Then you have the opposite, which is communist country. We will go then from how democracy and socialism are related, but let's say in a social democratic country, you have a big state who takes care of everything, and blah 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 blah. But then obviously your freedom is limited because you have to pay more taxes, you have to obey more rules, you have to go to public school, to public university, and so on. And the state tries to intervene to make it more democratic and to make it more to reduce inequality. So liberalism and democracy, two different principles. Let's see more in detail. So